I'm gonna say something a little controversial to the traditional off-roader, but this is all the 4x4 that you'll ever need. Let me explain. This is the new Bronco Sport Badlands Sasquatch, which means we get some extra off-road running gear that we'll talk about in this video, where we are out here in Borrego, California, in order to take this vehicle on some pretty challenging off-road trails. New on these Broncos is the rally off-road mode that I'm currently in, because we're rallying these vehicles around in some deep sand. And I've got to say, you don't typically think of the Bronco Sport as being a high-performance off-road vehicle, because it's not a long travel suspension, traditional high-performance off-roader like a Raptor model is, but it's actually pretty fun because this 2-liter has 238 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque, which feels pretty adequate. And we've even got a little bit more turbo whistle than I remember these cars having in the past. It's actually surprisingly fun to whip around a little bit in the deep sand, more so than I would expect. And the ride quality at speed is a little bit better than I would expect. You can definitely tell that this is a fully independent suspension that's primarily designed to work well on the street. But over some of this washboard, it's not as harsh as I would expect. Normally, in a vehicle in this category, I would expect it to beat you up quite a bit. And it's, once again, no Raptor, but it's better than you might think. Of course, one of the most important things you can have on any vehicle that's going to go off-road is your tire choice. And this Goodyear Territory all-terrain tire is pretty aggressive for a vehicle in this segment. Got nice chunky tread blocks and some sidewall protection as well. It's about a 29-inch tire, so it's not massive for some of the really big 4x4s out there, like a Jeep Wrangler or like the full-size Bronco, which is, of course, not what this car is competing against, but still a good tire choice on a 17-inch wheel. And this Sasquatch version of the Badlands Bronco Sport has about a ½ inch of a lift, and this one even has a piggyback shock in the rear, which is pretty cool. With that slight lift, you've got around 8.7 inches of ground clearance, which is not a massive amount, but still pretty decent for a vehicle of this size. And when you run out, we've got this bash plate on the front. So this is proper metal, which means if you need to take this off and replace it after bottoming out on a trail a little bit, that's something that you can do. We've got recovery points here in the front, and then attached to those recovery points, we've got this push bar that is removable. It's just 4 bolts, so if you don't like the look of it, or if you just want to run without it, it is something that you can pull off. But there is some decently substantial skid plating underneath in addition to this bash plate, which is pretty nice to have because the approach angle is okay on these, but I have been in a Bronco Sport in the past and run out, and when you start to rub plastic, it's not the greatest, so having a little bit of metal here on the very frontmost part of the vehicle is a good thing. Today we find ourselves in Borrego, California, which is not a location that I have personally off-roaded in before. And whenever I'm in a new place, I like to use onX Off-Road because that way we can see exactly where we're going off-road. We know what difficulty the different trails will be on are. We know the trail conditions, we can even see photos of them and see the types of vehicles that are recommended for those trails. And onX has a new feature as well where you can see what areas you will have cell phone coverage versus the areas that you won't, so that you can see where you'll be able to contact your friends that might be outside of your immediate circle. Click the link down below, check out onX Off-Road. Now I've got the Bronco Sport in rock crawl mode, and we have a little obstacle to drive up here, one that does look to be reasonably challenging for a vehicle of this sort. So I'm pretty excited to give it a look. In rock crawl mode, it does kick on your rear locker. And I kind of wish that it didn't kick on the rear locker automatically. I'd rather select that myself, but I understand why they do. Now they're having us go pretty close to these rocks on our right. We do have a good bit of underbody protection. I've also got my good camera views. I can see my pitch and roll, and it's saying I'm 17 degrees pitched up. I've got a decent bit of control, but I kind of wish that we had a low range. Of course, that would give me even more control. We've got enough gearing in the transmission here to make things happen, but this Bronco Sport can get up some things that maybe you wouldn't expect from looking at it on a dealer lot when it gets dwarfed by the full-size Broncos. Around the rear, we have a similar metal plate with some integrated recovery points that you could use to recover this vehicle or another in addition to your hitch as well. So again, some pretty nice off-road gear that they've equipped this new version of the Bronco Sport with. This vehicle, of course, also has a pretty substantial roof rack, and if you're using it quite often, you might like this feature that they've added, which is a tie-down point, and as it says printed right on top, the maximum is 150 pounds of force that you can put up against this. This loop is pretty small. I think you could still fit most ratchet straps through it, but it's a nice thing to have an extra tie down. Under the hood of the Bronco Sport is one of two different engine options. The base is a 1.5 liter 3-cylinder. It's not the best sounding engine. 180 horsepower, 200 pound-feet of torque with an 8-speed automatic, so it's adequate. But the 2-liter option on higher-end Bronco Sports gets you 238 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque, also through an 8-speed automatic. And that engine option also doesn't sound incredible, but it is surprisingly peppy. Got a pretty well-articulated section here. And I've got trail control on at the moment. So the vehicle is just controlling speed on its own, which is cool. It lets you just focus on your line. Pretty impressed with the rock crawling that they're putting us on here on this event, as it's gnarlier than what I would say most people do with a Bronco Sport.
There you go.
Very nice.
There you go.
And the trail control is pretty quick to respond when you start getting articulated. See, giving them just a little bump of throttle there to get through it. There's not a lot of articulation here in the Bronco Sport, so there's always going to be some limitations there, but I'm surprised that we haven't been bottoming out a whole lot here, because just half an inch of extra ground clearance doesn't sound like a ton, but it seems to be adequate for what we're doing. Inside of the new Bronco Sport, we've got a mix of things on the interior. One thing that I like a lot is the seat design. On this particular model, it brings in a few different colors, which makes it look fun, so I like that it's two-tone. It's got some contrast stitching and some different color inserts, and that's pretty nice. The design of this interior in general I also like. It's got a good looking dash, some cool design elements, and some cool different textures. Some of the materials do feel a little bit on the cheaper side. Not everything in here is as substantial as you would find in vehicles that are maybe more towards the top end of the market. But there's nothing in this interior that's super offensive as far as the materials are concerned. We've got a 12.3-inch screen for the gauge cluster and a 13.2-inch screen in the center, which is nice. The climate controls are built into that screen, which is not my favorite. I do kind of wish that we still had some climate controls built in as physical buttons here lower on the dash, just because I find them a little bit easier to do. But you could definitely argue that it cleans up your dash a little bit. We've got a wireless charger down below that center stack, a couple of cup holders. We have our rotary dial shifter, which is becoming pretty common, a lot of Ford products especially. And then we've got a few different off-road related switches here. So the most important of which are this 4-wheel drive lock and the rear locker behind it, which is one of the reasons that this vehicle actually punches a little bit above its weight class off-road. And then of course we've got a whole slew of GOAT modes, including 3 different off-road settings that are the off-road mode, rock crawl, and Baja. Up above, this Sasquatch also has 4 auxiliary switches, like a lot of other Ford products, that you can hook up to any accessory lights or whatever else you might want to power. This very well-equipped model also has a Bang & Olufsen audio system, which is pretty nice. across here in the dirt for us to try out rally mode with a little bit more of what I would call kind of a rally stage. And we've got some tight switchbacks. This is some kind of deep sand, and it's of course an all-terrain tire. It's not the most aggressive tire in the world, but this little Bronco Sport, it's actually a pretty good time. I'm surprised at how willing it is to kick the tail end out a little bit if you get on the throttle and get on to boost over a low traction surface like what we've got here. And it's a cool course that they've set up for us. I am definitely a fan. Surprised at how well the suspension handles some of the washboard. And it's a quick enough steering ratio to hustle it around. This is not very useful consumer advice for anyone who's shopping for a Bronco Sport, because it's not really what most people are going to buy this vehicle for. This is what you get a Ranger Raptor for, or even a full-size Bronco Raptor for, but it still does a good job of it, a surprisingly good job. Around back in the Bronco Sport, this is actually a place that I've spent a bit of time in, because one of my close friends has a Bronco Sport, and it's not too bad of a place to sit. I've got a fair amount of leg room, a decent bit of headroom because this is scalloped, so it's not the most massive vehicle in the world, but it is one that you can be relatively comfortable in for a longer trip, especially because we do have our own climate vents here in the back. No climate controls, no heated seats, but you still get airflow. And then below there, we've got a couple of USB-C ports as well as a bigger 110 outlet. In the trunk of the Bronco Sport, we've got a decent bit of space. It's not a massive vehicle, so there's going to be some limitations there, but it's decently boxy, so it's a pretty tall space. And we also have some mats here on the backs of the seats. So if you fold them down, you won't get mud or snow or anything on the carpeted backs of the seats, which is nice to have. Also got some power back here. We've got a 12 volt as well as another 110 outlet. And then if we lift up the cargo floor, you can see a full-size-ish spare tire. This is not the same tire that we have on the other four wheels, and it's not exactly the same size. This is a 225/65/17. It's a 235/65/17 on the others, and a more aggressive tire, but still something that you could use to potentially get off a trail if you have a flat. And of course, on the outside of the trunk, we've got a bottle opener. The more basic Bronco Sport starts around $32,000. However, if you spec these vehicles out with enough features, you can close in on the $50,000 range. The one that we had on the off-road trail today was about $46,000, so they can get pretty expensive when you start to add a lot of those features. And if that's an issue for you, as it would be for me, you can get a more basic model that still gets you some of these new off-road features, some additional protection underneath, and a slightly more aggressive tire in the black diamond version of it. There's quite a few different trims on these, so it's worth going to the configurator and checking out some of the different models that you can choose between, because there's a lot in this lineup. So that's all for this video. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Can this Bronco Sport, especially the Badlands Sasquatch, hold its own on an off-road trail? And do you agree? Is that enough 4x4 for most people out there on the road? That's all for this video, and we'll see you in the next.